good evening and welcome to tonight's edition of Resistance TV. On Monday this week, the day before International Day of Solidarity with Palestine, Issa Amro, who's been a previous guest on Resistance TV, was arrested by Israeli security forces and held in custody. He was due to appear in an Israeli military court this morning, but as we're pre-recording tonight's programme, we don't know the outcome of Issa's hearing. His crime, in inverted commas, was to video an Israeli soldier brutally beating an Israeli activist whose jaw was broken in the attack. Issa then posted the savage assault on social media. Issa even challenged the assailant, but the uniformed thug boldly stated, "I am the law." Following recent events and the election of a far-right government in Israel, there's now deep concern amongst activists and human rights organisations for Issa's safety and well-being. Earlier this month, for example, Israeli occupation forces imposed a closed military zone around Issa's home. Issa's activism has resulted in him being targeted by the Israeli authorities for many years now. He's the co-founder and former coordinator of the Hebron-based Youth Against Settlements initiative. And in 2010, he was declared Human Rights Defender of the Year in Palestine by the United Nations, no less. So joining me to discuss the latest abuse of power by the Zionist entity is Miko Peled, who himself was born in Israel. Miko served in the Israeli military, and his father was a leading Israeli general who fought in the 1967 war that resulted in Israel illegally occupying large parts of Palestine. But Miko's been campaigning for Palestinian rights now for many, many years, and he's written a book about his journey entitled The General's Son, that's available in the usual formats, including audiobook. So, Miko, I know that you've expressed concerns on social media about what's happened to Issa. In fact, you even said that you feared for his life. You thought his life was in danger. Can you say a bit more about why you said that?
Yes, well, thank you for having me on the show. It's great to talk to you again. And thank you for having the show. And thank you very much for also, bringing up the issue of Issa. We're sitting here now, some of us trying to figure out what to do because we don't even know where he is. The Israeli authorities won't even reveal his whereabouts, not even to his attorney. And so there's a great cause for concern. Now, there are two things that are happening here. One is there's been an ongoing campaign against Issa by the settlers in Hebron and by the military who hate him. And won't think anything of killing him, except that he's got an international support, kind of broad support and recognition. The second thing is that as a result of the latest Israeli elections, or the outcome of the elections, the most rabid right-wing thugs are now calling the shots. Itamar Ben Gvir, I'm sure you've heard the name. He resides in the settlement near Hebron in Kiryat Arba. He's been well known to be a racist thug, admiring and adoring, all kinds of figures who have killed Palestinians and so on, and calling himself for some terrible policies. He now is calling the shots, and he's going to be minister of what's called national security, which is a whole new portfolio created for him. And so ever since then, we have seen an escalation. The incidents that you described in the introduction in Hebron, there's been arson, cases of arson, countless of marches and graffiti, death to Arabs, kick out the Arabs and so on. And so there's an escalation in general throughout the entire country because now Ben Gvir's foot soldiers, if you will, are feeling empowered. Once he takes office, once there's a new government installed, if he takes office as this new minister of national security, he will have in his hands, he will have the power of budgets and policy making and passing of laws, of legislation, and he will be sitting in some of the most sensitive cabinet meetings. He'll be part of what's called the security cabinet, which is a cabinet within the cabinet. And it is extremely dangerous for Issa in particular, but for Palestinians in general. I think what is coming up is going to be the absolute worst Palestinians have ever seen. I think this is going to make us look back at this year, which, as you may know, is a record number of Palestinians killed this year, as the good old days. It's going to be much, much worse for Palestinians in 1948 and Palestinians in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, in Gaza. because of this, of the results. And the soldier, one of the soldiers that you mentioned, proudly said previously, actually, I've seen him talk about Ben Gvir before, saying, I voted for Ben Gvir, we will vote for Ben Gvir. And we know that about 30% of Israeli soldiers voted for Ben Gvir. So he has got immense popularity, and this whole ideology of violence and racism is very prevalent in the military and throughout Israeli society. So I think there's a great deal of that we should be very concerned, and we should do everything we can to step in and demand some kind of safety for the lives of Palestinians.
Absolutely. I mean, it's quite chilling what you said there, Miko. Given what we've witnessed over the recent past in Palestine, that your fear is that things are going to get worse. But one of the things I found encouraging, though, is the strength of the resistance in Palestine seems to be growing as well. But I wonder, before we get into that, maybe whether you might be able to enlighten us a little about the circumstance of these military courts that Issa is going to be, or indeed this morning, will have faced. And obviously we don't know the outcome of the hearing, but just tell us a little bit about how these military courts operate.
Well, to begin with, if Issa was an Israeli citizen, he would be out and about. I mean, there might be charges, there might be a court hearing. He would show up with a lawyer. Right now, like I said, he was arrested, and nobody even knows where he is, not even his lawyers. He's going to show up at the military court at the Ofer prison compound, which is like a massive fortress. And the judge is a settler, the prosecutor is a settler. Of course, the military courts are also military personnel. The lawyer will have a few moments with him, very quick maybe discussion with him. The proceedings are all in Hebrew. Issa speaks Hebrew, but the fact that he speaks Hebrew is, still most Palestinians do not speak Hebrew. The translator, by the way, is usually a settler as well. I've been to several hearings in previous times when Issa was in court. It's a kangaroo court. It's a joke, and we don't know. They might even. There's a good chance that they will postpone the hearing, and Issa will be in prison for another week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I mean, there's no timetable that we can rely on, and there's no way to demand any kind of timetable because Palestinians have no rights, and there's no recourse. They can't go to anyone and say, "Hey, we demand rights. We have rights, and they're not being respected," because they have no rights. And nobody steps in to support Palestinians. Nobody cares about their lives. He could be shot. There's no question that he could be killed. He could be shot. He could be tortured. And there's not going to be any recourse. So this is this is incredibly, incredibly concerning. He's got a 10-year-old son. I mean, it's terrible. It's really frightening. It's extremely, extremely frightening. And I'll say this again, what I said before, this new government with this new coalition government that's coming up is going to make us look back at this year as a good old day.
Yeah. I mean, of course, Issa has been an advocate of sort of non-violent resistance as well. And I mean, I know that the sort of the armed struggle, if you like, against the Zionist entity, is growing. And it seems that even somebody that has spurned violent resistance is, there's no quarter given to somebody like Issa. You'd have thought if the Israeli regime was acting in good faith, they would value somebody like Issa, but that doesn't seem to be the case, does it? And from what you're saying, things are, going to just get worse. It's sort of just, it seems that, Palestinians are just treated as animals, really. Would that be a fair assessment in your view?
Well, yes. I mean, the reality that Israel has created, and the reality that Israeli society finds completely acceptable, is a reality where you've got Israeli Jews who have all the rights. You've got some Palestinians who have limited rights, and you've got other Palestinians who have no rights. And this is all within the one state which exists on Palestine, which is the apartheid state of Israel, which But I mean, that's the reality. That's what the Israeli politicians are talking about as the future of the country. And that's what they expect Palestinians to accept, and that's it. And unless somebody steps in and says, wait, Palestinians have rights, Palestinian lives should be protected, Palestinian property, Palestinian children, Palestinian livelihood should be protected somehow, because there are no safeguards. People always talk about the security of Israel. Israel does not security issues. Palestinians, the security of Palestinians is never discussed, and that is the most burning issue. And particularly now with these new thugs who are going to be controlling the lives of Palestinians, they're going to have control over the budget, over the police, over law enforcement, everything that relates to the lives of Palestinians, both in the West Bank and within 1948, because they want to terrorize Palestinians throughout the entire country. Is all going to be in their hands, and it is extremely. I can't even imagine, how horrifying it's going to be, and nobody's stepping in. Nobody's stepping in to say we must protect Palestinians. The safety and security of Palestinians must be guaranteed somehow.
I mean, when people do step in, I mean, like for example, the Israeli activist that Issa filmed, who was being brutally assaulted. My information is that he's now under house arrest, and I believe a couple of female compatriots are similarly under house arrest. The information I've received. I don't know if you've heard anything yourself.
I did hear that he got 10 days in a military prison, but I that's kind of, I heard it through another. I didn't hear directly from any direct source.
Right.
And it's interesting because one of those. Because there are two videos. One where there's a verbal altercation where he says to him, "That's it, you're gone, you're done. Ben Gvir is going to get rid of you and the whorehouse that you run up here in Hebron, and everything you do is illegal. I am the law." And then there's another one where there's a bearded soldier who threw an activist on the ground and punched him, and like you said, broke his jaw. That one I had encountered. I was in Hebron with my kids a couple of months ago, and as things happen, we had an altercation with the soldiers, and that particular soldier with a big beard got right in our face and started cussing in English, and it was really, the violence is unbelievable, and they hate anyone who comes to the aid of Palestinians is immediately an enemy. The hatred, this is just unbelievable. And so that's the reality. These are the soldiers that are there. This is and these are commonplace soldiers. There's nothing unique about them. This is what the Israeli military is like.
I mean, I got a very minute taste of that with the sort of abuse that I'm subjected to on social media. But in the end, it's just social media, and so it doesn't really have any real meaningful impact on me in that sense. But for people on the ground, for people confronting this on a daily basis, or indeed, people like yourself who, are not there all the time, but go there and, obviously as a former Israeli person yourself, I mean, it must be a very intimidating experience, Miko. I mean, how do you feel in those circumstances when you've been in that situation?
It's terrible. It's terrifying. And to think so it's terrifying to be in that position when you're someone like me who has the law on their side and has privilege. Although limited, as obviously that one activist experienced.
Yeah.
But Issa was threatened by the brigade commander. He came to his home and threatened him.
Mm.
He is threatened. I saw him being threatened by soldiers. I saw settlers look at him and say, "Issa, I'm going to come and murder you one day." And they said this in the open in front of cameras and in front of soldiers, and then got high fives from the soldiers. Like that in our face, "Issa, I'm going to come and murder you one day. You're going to see this." It's out there. The discourse is that blatantly racist and violent, and there's no recourse. I always say, Shireen Buckley was killed. She was a very well-known, very well-respected journalist. If somebody suggested a year ago or a year before she was killed that she might be killed one day, assassinated one day, it would have seemed absurd. She was killed. There was some protest. There was some, condemnation, but that's it. There's no recourse. I mean, nobody's going to pay the price. Nobody's going to court. Nobody's going to jail. The same thing can happen to Issa any day now, at any moment, and thousands of others like him that we don't even know. Palestinian children are being killed on a daily basis. I mean, the Israeli military has gone completely haywire in murdering young Palestinians over the last year. It's just insane. And we see their picture on social media, and everybody mourns for 5 minutes, and then we move on because then there's the next one, and nobody steps in to say enough. Not the UN, not the special rapporteur who I know and I spoke to, not any, not the Europeans, not the Americans. Nobody steps in and says we have to stop this apartheid regime. We have to stop this brutality. We have to have guarantees for the life and the safety of Palestinians. They are being butchered every single day. Their lives are in danger. And instead, what we're seeing is the Biden administration and the Europeans are silent about Netanyahu's coalition with these racist thugs. So we know things about.
I mean, it's in some ways it's even worse because pro-Palestinian activism is sort of being criminalised. The Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions campaign is sort of efforts being made to outlaw it in this country. I think in parts of Europe we're seeing similar moves, and obviously the Israeli regime, the Zionist regime, is creating the climate where this sort of brutality, this violence, is getting worse. And as you say, with the election of the extreme far right administration into Israel, things could get even worse again. But are not the Europeans, the United States, also culpable for not calling time on this? I mean, the leader of the opposition, it's looking like, unless we can create an alternative socialist vehicle in Britain that is attractive sufficiently to the electorate by the time of the next election, it's looking likely that the Labour Party will get into power in Britain, and the leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer, says that he supports Zionism without qualification.
Yeah.
Well, supporting Zionism without qualification means supporting this brutality, because at the end of the day, Zionism is an appalling racist settler colonial ideology that actually promotes this sort of behaviour. This is the natural conclusion of Zionism, it seems to me. So are not those European political leaders and American political leaders culpable for what's happening in Israel now?
Oh, they're completely complicit. And just to add on to what you said about the criminalization of support for Palestine, you and I met when they were coming after you for with these ridiculous anti-Semitic charges, and what's absurd is that the Europeans, the Brits, the Americans, they're saying that they oppose anti-Semitism, and that the way they oppose anti-Semitism is by supporting Israel and calling themselves Zionists. Well, Zionism, like anti-Semitism, is a form of racism, is a racist ideology. So to say that you oppose anti-Semitism but you support Zionism is completely absurd. It's completely absurd. These are both racist mentalities. These are both racist ideologies. They're both calling for racism against a particular people. And so that's the absurdity of it all. And yes, of course, the Americans are complicit. The Americans pay $4 billion or $3.8 billion every year for Israel to do what it's doing. This is coming
Isn't that incredible, Miko? There's been a lot of talk on some of the alternative media channels about the colossal sums that the United States is giving to Ukraine, although a lot of that money will end up back in the coffers of the military-industrial complex in the US. And yet you've got people sleeping on every bridge in every town and city in the United States of America. And we've not got quite as bad as that in this country, but we saw Rishi Sunak, the new British Prime Minister, over in Ukraine, and talking about how much they supported them, giving them huge finance. Well, we similarly have huge social problems of homelessness and other issues with National Health Service collapsing, etc. And yet these politicians, quite happily will throw money at Israel. It's
giving
incredible.
Foreign aid to a country that's rich and has needs. If you want to give foreign aid, give foreign aid. There's plenty of countries that can use foreign aid. Israel does not need foreign aid, and it is money that is going precisely towards the killing and oppression of Palestinians. That's all it is. And like you said, the Europeans, the Americans, they're all, and these new Arab regimes that have signed on to the Abraham Accords, they are all supporting this terrible oppression against the Palestinians, the killing, the brutality, this criminal regime that all that they want is to destroy Palestine and to destroy the Palestinian people, and they do it in the most cruel methods, and the most cruel.
No, indeed. Although you mentioned the Abraham Accords and the Arab leadership that are talking about normalising relations with Israel. But for me, I think it shows how out of touch they are with their people just by the reaction that we're seeing at the World Cup, where obviously it's on the doorstep. You've got a lot of Arab nations or people from various Arab nations there, at the World Cup, and they're venting their feelings about the situation in Palestine, showing their support very, very visibly and volubly for the Palestinian cause, and indeed giving some of the Israeli news reporters, and if you've seen any of the clips on social media, where they've certainly been giving them a piece of their mind. So to me, it kind of that's an indication, I think, that those leaders, are out of touch. But then, aren't leaders often out of touch with their people? I wonder though. I remember speaking to you a few years ago, Miko, and you were optimistic about the future for Palestine. I think you said something along the lines, you wouldn't be doing what you do. You wouldn't be campaigning in the passionate way that you are, if you didn't feel that there was a positive end result, light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, are you still optimistic that the Palestinians will be resolved, favourably?
I think that, I think hope is something we create. I mean, it's not there for the taking. We create the hope and we create the optimism. I think that at the end of the day, Palestinians will prevail. I think the Zionist regime will collapse. When we look at this state, at the Israeli state, Israel used to be very proud of its healthcare system, its education system, its judicial system, the military. Were all very, honest and incorruptible and provided important services. And they're all completely bankrupt. The Israeli healthcare system is bankrupt. Hadassah, which used to be the flagship of Israeli healthcare, is bankrupt. Doctors can't get away fast enough. Nobody wants to work there. The Israeli education system is bankrupt. It's falling apart from we're talking about young age education all the way through high education. The military is completely corrupt. I mean, the Israeli generals, if they had to lead the Israeli army into a real war, they would lose very quickly. They have no experience. They have a lot of firepower, but they don't have the skills, the quality of personnel, the motivation to defeat another military. People talk about this idea of maybe Iran, which I don't think is ever going to happen, but Israel will be defeated very easily. I think if they have to face a well-trained army, as we saw them with Hezbollah, I mean, they were defeated easily. So the Israeli military is completely full of hot air. The Israeli police is completely corrupt. Every time they have to find an Israeli police commissioner, there's always issues because they can never find an officer who would be able to pass the rigorous, parliamentary committees that, because of corruption issues or sexual abuse issues. So, I mean, at every stage where you look at the state, the Israeli state, it's collapsing. It's being held by its threadbare. But they have money and they have, like I said, firepower, and that's what's keeping them alive. So I think on the one hand, the fact that Palestinians do persevere and are fighting and do not give up, and on the other hand, the fact that the state is collapsing, I think it is inevitable. I think it's inevitable that we will see a free Palestine, certainly in our lifetimes. But we'll have to work. We're going to have to push. We're going to have to work hard.
Absolutely. I mean, I want to sort of come on to that, but I've heard, senior figures actually, former prime minister in Israel, talking in terms that, they I can't remember the phraseology that they used, but it was along the lines that they could foresee a time, when the Israeli regime, could collapse. And I think it's a sort of a rallying cry, maybe. But it's interesting to hear them speaking in those terms. But look, I mean, Miko, you're based in the States, and as you mentioned, the US give huge support, financial support to Israel, without which I suspect they might struggle. Do you see any change in that, or is the moves afoot in the US to force a political change in regards to the support that they are giving to Israel? I know that sort of Trump sort of played to the kind of Christian Zionist zealots, as a sort of a political tool. But I just wonder whether there's been, are there any straws in the wind in the United States, any kind of grassroots uprising against the way in which the United States policy towards Israel has been carried out?
There's very marginal change, but the problem is that we're always reactive. The Palestinian issue, the Palestinian struggle does not have a mother and a father. There are no parents. There's nobody running it. And the few little groups, grassroots groups or NGO groups that try to, somehow lobby for Palestinian rights or promote the idea of Palestinian rights are very small and they're insignificant and they can't compete. They're not even trying to compete with the Israelis. And so, and they're always reactive. Nobody's initiating anything. As an example, there are several Arab countries and Muslim countries who refuse to join the Abraham Accords. We should be there supporting them. We should be there talking to people on the ground, talking to, to social activists, talking to some of the leaders, saying, creating a campaign to strengthen them, because they're not going to stay there forever. At some point, the push to join the Abraham Accord is going to be, just too tempting. Things like that. There's nobody initiating anything. And until I think we come to a point where the Palestinian issue does have a parent, some sort of a parent, somebody who is initiating, somebody who is catching up to the Zionists, then we're not going to see any change. And this is true in America. I think it's true in Europe. It's true in the UK. They're passing, about the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, right? This complete nonsense. So there's a local county adjacent to Washington, D.C., which just passed adopted this resolution. And they did it in secret. They didn't even announce it. And somehow it was found out, so then they postponed it. But then they did it again in secret and saying, well, we have to fight anti-Semitism. Why? What the hell? What for? I mean, what was wrong with the old definition of anti-Semitism? If there's a racism problem.
The dictionary definition, the Oxford Dictionary definition. I've got the Oxford Dictionary here, Miko, and I think if you look in there for what the definition of anti-Semitism, it's very straightforward.
Completely.
You don't need, I don't know how many words are there in the IHRA working definition. I mean, it's all about
Israel.
Yes, I mean it's all about basically stopping, like you say, criticism of Israel. That's entirely what it's about. But just in terms of Palestinian liberation, I've seen Palestinian activists on the ground saying that their liberation, won't come from outside. It'll come from their own efforts. And as we were saying earlier in our conversation this evening, the strength of the Palestinian resistance on the ground does seem to be stronger than it's been for some time. I mean, what's your thoughts on that? I mean, do you see the salvation is in their own hands rather than necessarily relying on external support?
Palestinians are like inmates in a maximum security prison. They're capable of having a little thing here, a little thing there. There's a little operation here, a little operation there. There are people like Issa, who are doing things, but there's no strategy. There's obviously, there's no movement. There's nothing even that even remotely can challenge Israel, not militarily, not diplomatically, not politically, in any even stretch of the imagination. There's no way Palestinians can do this unless we all gear up and create some kind of an entity that promotes a free Palestine, full stop. You can't expect. I think it's inmates in a maximum security prison cannot strategize. They cannot. Everything they do is they're either followed by the Israeli intelligence services or the Palestinian Authority intelligence services. And you've got people on this side that don't like these people. You've got all these issues. There's no way Palestinian. You can't go from Jerusalem to Hebron without everybody knowing, and being, if you're Palestinian, you're probably going to be arrested. I mean, it's impossible. There has to be a serious organization on the outside in London, in Washington, D.C., where there is real strategic thinking, where there is real forward thinking, where the issue is not peace, not dialogue, not reconciliation, but an absolute free Palestine, an absolute a surrender of the Zionist regime, exactly like was done with apartheid South Africa. The South Africans had the ANC, they had the South African Communist Party, they had Mandela, they had Joe Slovo, they were parents to the struggle.
Yeah.
Nothing's perfect, but they were parents. There were serious forces that were uncompromising. In Palestine, we don't have that. It was destroyed. Whatever little there was has been destroyed. And there's nothing that's taking its place. And it has to come, I think, from Washington, D.C. It has to come from London. That's where the power is. That's where the influence is. And I think that's the only places that can actually bring about change.
And of course, the struggle against apartheid in South Africa had a worldwide kind of social movement behind it. But that, in terms of Palestinian liberation, has been hampered by things like the IHRA. And so there's this so-called new anti-Semitism, which is obviously criticism of Israel. And that's clearly a deliberate political tactic, the sort of things that we are exposing on our program that I host, the Palestine Declassified, a weekly program looking at the efforts of the Israeli regime or the war, basically, against global solidarity with the illegally occupied people of Palestine. But Miko, you were saying that a lot of the health system in Israel is collapsing. All of its kind of its sort of functions, its social services, if you like, that used to pride itself on are falling apart. I mean, is there a possibility that it might destroy itself?
It will. There's no question that it will. I think there's no question that it will, but it's got the means because there's so much money, and the economy is strong, and it's got this international support that it can hold on for a very long time. It can hold on for a very, very long time. I mean, the poor are getting poorer, the rich are getting richer. Of course, the Palestinians are the poorest of the poor. But it can hold on. I mean, it can hold on, and as long as it holds on, Palestinians are going to be killed. Palestinians are going to be suffering. We can see Issa be killed. Issa killed. We can see 1,000 Issa killed before anything happens. And so, while yes, I do think the system, all the systems of the state of Israel are falling apart, are collapsing without any doubt. I mean, look how many elections they've had over the last. I mean, look, if that is not a sign of instability, I don't know what is. And it's not because of ideological differences. This is not because of ideological differences. It's the only difference, the only argument between the different parties is who gets to sit in the prime minister's seat. That's it. That's the only argument. And right now, of course, Netanyahu, he's the most experienced. He's the big dog. Nobody can challenge him. And I think it was pretty obvious that he was going to come back.
Yeah.
But that's the only difference. Ideologically, there are no differences. They all kill Palestinians wholesale, whether they're generals or whether they're just regular politicians. This is not even an issue. Palestinian rights, human rights, democracy is not that. They don't care about that. They don't care about social issues. They don't care about workers. They don't care about the kind of values that I know you and I feel very strongly about. They don't care about that. They're quite happy to create this bubble, and they just want to be governed. They just want to be the ones with the budgets doing whatever they want.
Looks like we've lost Miko's signal there, so I think we're probably going to have to call it a night there now. I hope you found the programme interesting anyway for the 40 minutes or so that we did have Miko online. Thanks for watching this evening. We'll be back next week on Resistance TV, so hopefully you'll join us then. Thanks for watching this evening, and good night.